Hello everyone and welcome back. If you missed my post a few weeks ago, we will cover this case today with deep distal decay and how to address it. Spoiler alert, we did something called deep margin elevation or DME. This technique has been discussed in the literature since the 80s, but has recently gained prominence due to several factors. If you'd like to review some of the literature, I highly recommend this review article from the Journal of Dentistry from 2024. As you can see, it is quite extensive. When I asked the question to my YouTube audience, I expected a few people to have concerns about this procedure, and it is no surprise that a few of you mentioned that crown margin should be on tooth structure, not composite. This is even stated in the article's introduction, which states that 78% of dentists had more than one concern about the procedure. These include problems with isolation, marginal leakage, biological width invasion, or issues with the evidence base. What is cool about this article is that they examined the different studies available online as expected, but also looked at opinion pieces, surveys, articles, magazines, and even a few podcasts on the topic. I highly recommend reading through the entire article, but to summarize their conclusions, DME is a valuable technique for predictably restoring deep caries where the traditional crown margin would be subgingival. However, a few things are essential for the procedure to be successful. The first is you have to use rubber dam. This is not a problem for me. Many articles discuss the different types of matrix bands that could be used and how to ensure you get sound isolation. My way around that is you fill up the whole thing and then cut it back, so you don't have to worry about using a band. Many studies have also looked at the materials recommended, and I'm happy to report that the clear fill bonding agent I use was constantly recommended for its superior bonding to dentin, so that made me feel great. Now, with the other materials, given its reduced strength, they recommended against glass ionomer for this procedure. I use either a zirconia reinforced dual cure composite, which is Luxicor, or a fiber reinforced dual cure composite, which is Build-It. While I have seen amalgam successfully used in the past, it is getting phased out due to the European Parliament banning dental amalgam starting in 2025. We've also seen its use decrease significantly in the United States. Most general dentists I work with ask me not to restore any case with amalgam if they have to prepare it for a crown. At this point, I only use amalgam on friends or family, or to restore occlusal accesses through gold crowns. Conclusions of the article are, as always, there needs to be better clinical trials, no surprise there. They recommend DME when restoring subgingival margins as it is less invasive than crown lengthening or extraction. I've been performing this procedure for the past, say, 8 to 10 years, and once you explain this procedure to the general dentist, they tend to understand it and vastly prefer it because it's a much easier crown preparation, much easier scan or final impression, and it makes cleansability of the margin easier for the patient. The study also found that periodontal health was better in cases with deep margin elevation than crown lengthening, using clinical outcomes such as pocket depth and bleeding on probing. The final thing to consider here is that the long-term prognosis will be lower in all of these cases, given the pre-existing decay and structural issues. Therefore, the chance of eventual extraction will be higher. The beautiful thing about this procedure is that compared to crown lengthening, we do not remove any interproximal bone, which is very difficult to regrow for a potential implant down the road. With that background out of the way, let's get into how I address this tooth. So, no surprise here as far as which tooth that we're looking at. This is going to be looking on here, deep distal decay. You can see there's nothing really fancy on the crown, but the first thing we need to do is cut off the crown. So I think I may have done a video on this in the past, but let's go ahead and review it. For PFMs, the first thing you want to do is take that big prep burr, make a slit along both the occlusal and buccal surface. You then come right back in with your metal cutting burr to remove the metal coping of the PFM. In this case, there was an amalgam buildup underneath there. And I remember when as I was doing it, like, oh, I'll just cut into the amalgam buildup a little bit. And future Scott will tell his viewers, because I knew I was recording this one, why I did that. And I don't remember why I did that. There's no real reason that you don't have to. Normally you would try to not touch the tooth structure, but I knew I was going to be removing. It doesn't matter. The future Scott and past Scott have a lot of fights, and present Scott is just here in the middle of all of it. And it's something I do. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and start removing this crown here. And you'll notice that the splitter, as it's doing that, it's popping off those pieces of the porcelain. This is an important thing to discuss with your patient. It's a weird experience for them to hear all these noises. So before I start doing that, I always let the patient know, hey, you're going to hear some clicks and pops. It's not your tooth breaking. It's just the porcelain. This is very common with this sort of thing. And this is one of the reasons I love doing it. If possible, remove your crowns with a rubber dam on. Even if you're a general dentist watching this, it's very easy to have your assistant put the rubber dam on, and it makes it so that all these little fragments don't get stuck in their mouth. You don't have to worry about aspiration. Cleanup, as you'll see in a second, is very easy, and it makes it just a lot simpler to get everything off. So I was trying to dislodge it with the hemostats there, not really able to grab it. As you can see, we did break off quite a few pieces of the porcelain. Thankfully, it's very easy for the assistant to just grab those with their suction and get it all out of the mouth, and that way it's a nice clean surface. So now that the porcelain has broken, you'll see there's a little bit more room for the metal to start to stretch. So we're going to come in here now with the crown splitter. And as you can see, a lot easier for it to move. And in this case, I didn't even have to grab the hemostats. I was able to pop everything off just with the crown splitter. This is one of the easiest type of crowns to remove. Gold's also pretty straightforward. The hardest one, I would say, is a bonded Emax, because when it's bonded well, it's near impossible to split those off. You end up having to cut most of the pieces off, which is a lot more complicated. Looking at the tooth here, you can see we got that lovely slit in the amalgam. Still don't know why I did that, but look at the decay on the distal. That's what we're going to be working with now. First thing I need to do is remove the rest of that amalgam, and I'm going to use the metal cutting burr and just try to flick it off, and you'll see it pops off very easily on its own. I'm going to then go back in with the 8 round, and you'll notice I start by taking off some of that stain in the area. It was hard, but it is definitely harder to bond to that tooth. And in a case like this, the way that it's going to fail is going to either be because of leakage or because of structural issues. As we go throughout the video, I'll discuss how I'm going to try to mitigate both of those issues here. But one of the ways that we're going to make sure we don't have leakage is by getting the best possible bond that we can. So in my thought process, it's better to remove the 1/10 of a millimeter of dentin to make sure we expose some cleaner stuff that'll have a better bond. Another thing you always want to do when working on patients like this is to make sure the patient is on board. This patient was fantastic, great guy, and he wanted to save his tooth. He knew it was questionable, but he wanted to save it. So one of the things I'll tell the patient before I even start working is, I need to cut your crown off to see how much tooth structure is remaining. I cannot see through the metal part of your crown, so I don't know if the whole tooth is there or if there's nothing left there. The key here is to set the bar low. If you cut the crown off and there's nothing left, you can say, hey, it's unfortunately, as I was suspecting, it's not going to be enough tooth structure to restore. It has to come out. But by setting the bar low, Louis style, you can then come in and say, great news, we actually have enough tooth structure left. It's worth saving here. So just like everything we do in endodontics, set the bar low. That way you can just hop over it and deliver on what you need to do. At this point, we've removed most of the caries here. You'll see me coming in with the Endo Explorer just to make sure there's no sticks. Don't play around with leaving bonded to affected dentin, anything like that. Just make sure it's as clean as possible in a case like this, because you want to have the best chance of success. So we're going to start the root canal process properly, go in with the 8C. You can see I dropped the length beautifully on the palatal. The buccal, however, bent it a little bit. Yeah, I did get a stick, but we were fine. I'm going to do the coronal flaring here with the 2006 and then come in with Triton just to get everything nice and clean. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. Now you can see there is some bleeding from the gingiva. We'll be dealing with that in just a few minutes, but that's a consideration here, is you want to make sure you can handle this. Now, when I have done the working length in the past few videos, I feel like I've just droned on and on and on. So in this one, I just did speed it up 3 times. If you have questions about how to do working length, let me know, but I feel like we've gone over that in one of the 70 videos that I've posted on this topic, so you should be good to go here. Now, sometimes I'll go to just a 17 here. Sometimes I'll use a 2006. In this case, the 2006 actually dropped down pretty nicely from the very beginning, so I ended up just using this for the entire thing. What this allows me to do is also place the posts just a little bit deeper, or potentially use a larger size post for strength. We'll talk about this when we go to the post videos, or post part of the video of how I do this, but just as a reminder, we don't necessarily need to place the post for retaining the core. That's more of an antiquated thought process based on us using amalgam as the core material, which did not bond to the tooth structure, as you can see. So it's kind of an outdated thought and idea. What we use post for now, though, is to prevent a snap-off failure, because how this tooth is going to fail is if it has a lot of lateral forces with little remaining ferrule. You can see there's a decent amount on the palatal, but not too great on the buccal. What's going to happen is that whole thing's going to snap off. By placing fiber posts inside this tooth, it's going to take that force and move it farther down. Now, one thing I did just point out there is those streaks on the mirror. Not sure if you can see that. I've been noticing these things recently, and what's been going on is the Triton, if you leave it on there for too long, it'll actually start to eat away at the coating on the mirror. I'm still not sure exactly why it happens, but it's very annoying because I've been going through a lot more mirrors than I'm going to keep playing around with kind of different things. If you are using Triton, make sure you rinse it off right away. At this point, we're going to stop that bleeding. Normally, I'm not as worried about a little bit of bleeding from the gums when I'm just doing the obturation, as long as it doesn't get into the canal itself. But as you can see here, it was quite excessive as far as the bleeding, so I wasn't going to be able to get the tooth all the way dry. He did feel it, so I used a little bit of septo here just to get it nice and numb, because I don't want him feeling that process. And what this allows me to do then is do a little bit more work with the alpha system barbecue style, just to get the gingiva out of the way and just have it stop bleeding. Also, that may be one of my favorite terms. I just recently learned that one, that the system barbecue. It's just absolutely fantastic. Anyway, now that they're nice and numb, we're going to be removing the rest of the gingiva here, making it so that we can predictably obturate this case and not have leakage the entire time. We will be doing a little bit more work when it comes time to do the buildup to make sure that we have a very clean margin, because once again, when you're doing cases like this, you have to make sure you have as clean a margin as possible, and making sure you don't have any leakage coming from the gingiva is going to be key. After you remove it, I do like to come in with Cutterell viscostat. It's the ferric sulfate stuff. You guys all know what it is and love it. And that just makes sure that there's any bleeding spots, it gets them out of the way. The other nice part is by using this tip that has the brush on the end, by scrubbing it, you can almost get the gums to physically move out of the way and give you a little more space. It's okay if you have the bone exposed. Now, some of you might be saying, oh my God, that poor patient, they're going to be in so much pain. We called the patient the day after, he was doing totally fine. And others of you might be saying, oh my God, the general dentist is going to kill you. You'll actually see at the end of the video, I have the text message from the general dentist regarding this case. He said the gums look great on both the distal as well as the palatal, and everything heals up. A lot of people think that by doing this, you're going to actually create more inflammation. But what the studies have kind of shown when it comes to healing is that when you have inflammatory-based healing, which is what you would be doing if you just left this as is, you're going to end up with kind of a less great product as far as the gingiva. When you remove everything, now when it's healing by secondary intention via traumatic process, the gingiva that replaces this gum tissue is going to be more keratinized and more resistant to bacterial insult or other types of issues. So that's where the thought process comes from. I have I've done this also for 10 years. If you guys need to see cases of me doing this, it's amazing how well the gum tissues heal. I have lots of examples. If you'd like me to show you that, please drop a comment below. At this point, though, we're going to be doing the obturation. Squirt fill for this one, nothing out of the ordinary. It's nice and skinny, and that's what it looks like. You can see there is a little bit of bleeding at the top, but it's so minor right now, I'm not worried about that for the obturation. We will go back in and address that before I do the final buildup, because we want to make sure that margin is clear. As far as this, you've seen the squirt fill plenty of times. Now, I don't know how many of you watched my previous... Actually, I can tell you how many of you watched my previous video, because there's numbers on it. But for all those of you watching right now, if you didn't see my last video on anesthesia with the residents, we had a really good time. At the final 15 minutes, we stopped and did kind of like a Ask Me Anything process. And one of the things we talked about was the squirt technique, how it works, ways to make it easier, mitigate any concerns they may have. And so if you do have questions about it, make sure you go to that. There is a timestamp on the video. And then if you still have questions, please drop them below. I know this is a complex, it's difficult, it's very technique sensitive, but if you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer. I think it's a great technique that more people should be using. At this point, we're going to be removing that lovely angry gingiva. So back to the alpha here, and you can see I'm using the thicker tip, the 4504. I'm going to be placing smaller posts in this one. It's going to be a 4004 post size. So I will use a 3504 tip to remove the gutta percha and burn it down. What I found, though, is that's just too skinny to effectively remove the gingiva. You need something a little bit thicker. And so if you, regardless of what system you're using, try to get like a medium-sized tip here. That way you don't have to remove excessive amounts of gingiva, but it's also carrying enough heat that it stops the bleeding process. As you can see here, we've switched to that 35. That's going to get ready for the posts, and we're going to come in and just make sure, pack those all down and get ready for the x-ray and make sure everything looks great here. You can see still a little bit weepy, but we'll address that when it comes time to do it. At this point, what I need to make sure is that the obturation looks good and there's no issues with the root canal itself. So that image looked fantastic. We're going to go ahead and start the process of building everything up now. Like I said, there was still a little bit of weepage in here, so we're going to go back in with the Cutterell. I really want to make sure that these margins are as clean as possible. What you'll also find is that when you use the air abrasion unit, because it is like, it's pretty much a sandpaper is what you're throwing in there. Because it is like that, it's going to cause some bleeding if you don't have anything as dry and as, resistant, like pretty much clotted up as possible. So do a little bit extra here. Make sure that there's no leakage, no bleeding, anything like that, and you'll have a much higher chance of success. At this point, we're going to be using the BioClear disclosing solution just to see if there's any biofilm that we need to blast off, and then I'll come back in with the blaster. One thing I forgot to mention in the background statement at the beginning of the video is pretty much all the studies show that air abrasion is really important to make sure you get a great bond. I'm happy to, it made me feel good. Obviously, David Clark is fantastic. We knew he was right, but it made me feel good to know that I've been doing something that a lot of the studies have shown does make a difference. So if you haven't adapted this into your workflow, it will take a little bit of time, but it doesn't add that much time and does make a difference as far as the bond strength and how it looks. It does also make the final photos look a lot prettier. So too. But the blaster is a nice little tool to have along with you. So rinsing that all off, it is important then to go back and check again to make sure that there's no bleeding spots. There you can see nothing's actively bleeding. Switch over to the photo mirror for the picture here. Notice how much brighter that is. That's why we use these photo mirrors, is because they're a much brighter image, but they have no protective coating, so they get scratched up super quickly. I'm going to use the total etch technique here. Even though I am using a self-etching primer bonding agent, it is still, based on the most recent studies I've shown, it is still the best to do a total etch followed by your self etch. You can see the rim of enamel around the outside, so I do want to make sure we get a nice bond to that, and it's not going to negatively affect it. Take a look at that picture. You can see the gums do look a mess, but they are dry, and that's exactly what we need to have happen. So coming in now with our bonding agent, and if you haven't looked into it yet, I would recommend everybody get this air-only Stropco attachment. It's not expensive to add to your cart or whatever unit you have. All you need is an air line, and it allows you to very precisely place the air so that you can spread everything out and thin it. Because how many of you have done the process where you go to air thin it and water shoots out of it? This is only air, so it's impossible for that to happen. Makes your life a lot easier. Now we're going to be placing the post inside here, and one thing with posts to remember is you always want to bond them. You never want to cement them. So always bond, never cement. That's been shown time and time again in the literature. And so we're going to be using Luxacor, and I'm using the opaque one here. The reason I'm using the opaque is that in case the dentist wants to convert this to a traditional crown preparation, it'll be very easy for him to see where the margin is. And I'm using the blue tip so that I can go down inside the actual canals. Now you'll notice that the posts have that glaze on them. That's the bonding agent. So we're using a sandwich technique here where the bonding agent was in the canals, we air thinned it, dried it, the assistant at the same time places it on there, and the composite acts as the sandwich in between. When you're doing these though, with these large buildups, you'll notice I'm pushing really hard. I'm a big guy, I got big hands, and even with that shaking you see is me pushing so hard trying to get this composite out of there because the cannula is so small. So one thing you can do is start by using the blue Centrix tube to precisely place the composite where you need for the actual post preparation, and then what you'll do is switch over to the brown tube. Much easier to have this placed. It's very easy for the system just to put a larger strip of composite into the two canals or into the two cannulas. That way you have them ready to go. So it did not take long to switch that out, and this way it's much easier on your hands to build everything back up to a more solid size. The next thing you can do to make your life a little bit more easy is to take the glick and start the process of where you're going to place the margin here. It makes it a lot easier then when you come in with the prep burr to almost have an idea of where you want to go, and that way you're not going to have to creating your own process. You can do some of the work with the glick. Now this stuff is really soft, so it's not like you can shape it like you would traditional packable. Go ahead and do your light cure here and then start the process. Now I did cut the post off. That was where I told you that I haven't actually told you this. This is like the 40th time I've done this recording. It's been a day, you guys. You just have no idea. Anyway, the microscope can see farther outside than the camera can because the microscope's a circle, the camera's a square, and so I did remove that initially by using just the flat disc, but it wasn't even worth keeping in there. This video is already long enough, and so I have been cutting out some of the excessive stuff. Now, what we're going to be doing is coming in with that prep burr and starting the process of just kind of tidying up the margin. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking away the composite just down to the margin so that there's a nice, easy transition from the tooth itself to the composite. So that's the first thing we need to do, because we want to make sure this is perfect. We want to make sure there's no defects, there's no issues with it, because this is where you're going to get the recurrent decay if you're going to get it. So you can see me going around the outside here. This is why removing that gum tissue is actually really nice, because it gets it out of the way. So I'm not actually hitting the gums because the alphas already removed them for me. It's about the size of the prep burr. So you can see there's not a ton of bleeding in this, really. I'm able to make it so it's not very difficult to do the initial part here. Now, what we're going to be doing after this is, I can't remember because I haven't watched this far into the video. This is like, it is the 40th take of it, but I'm just done. This is going to be the last one. So if there's mistakes, we're just rolling with it. I'm at that point right now. So, all right. So what happened here, it was a little bit soft when I go, there's still some areas that are soft when it is this deep sometimes. It is dual cure, but Luxacor does take about 3 to 5 minutes for full curing. So sometimes when you start to do the process, you have to go back in. Not a big deal. But what we're finishing up here is the rest of that prep. Once again, I want to create almost like a cylinder of composite that's completely smooth, and then I'll start the process of actually doing the crown preparation. This way you can make sure you don't have to add anything, redo it. You want that to be perfect before you go on with the crown prep, and that's what we're doing here. The rest of this is actually pretty straightforward. You can see I'm just making sure that we get it as clean as possible, and the one thing to consider here is there is a slight invagination between the two teeth. This is really common that we have that groove, kind of that mid-root groove here, and you want to make sure you follow this so that it doesn't trap plaque or anything like that. And that's what I was doing right there, is kind of starting that process of shaping it so that it's as smooth as possible. Lots of rinsing here to make sure we can see everything. And at this point, we're gonna actually start the crown preparation. So what I'm doing here is starting at one of the angles and using where I pretty much think the gingiva is going to be, and starting to do the crown prep itself. I've started a little bit higher just in case I need to adjust it, because you can always, take away more composite. It's a little harder to add. And I'm doing about 1 millimeter of depth. That gives the dentist some room to play with. If they need to go deeper, they can. You'll see I do have the text message at the end. I think I mentioned this already, that the dentist didn't have to do too much of adjustment to this tooth whatsoever, which is great. And you'll see here why I don't do crowns normally, because I'm very finicky and precise, and it would take absolutely forever for me to do a crown. So I want to make sure I do it as well as the general dentist. This is where I'm efficient when it comes to the root canal. I am not efficient when it comes to crown preps. I'll tell you that right now. And so that's why I'm taking my time here, making really light brushing motions to make sure that this is as pretty as possible, because my job is to make the general dentist's life easy. And by making it to where he didn't have to do too much, that could have got him caught back up on this day. Regardless, it's a good thing to do no matter what. So just kind of going line angle to line angle, roughly where the gingiva was, because I think it should heal back up to that area, and going around the tooth and just pretty much doing a crown prep. That's all we're doing here. Nothing complex. We've all done this. All of us are dentists. We all had to do crowns at once in our life. So you have the skills to do it. If you're like me and don't like doing it and it takes you forever, it might take you a little bit longer, but that's not a big deal. So you want to try to make it look like, imagine that you're doing a crown prep for the scariest row instructor you had, and that's what I'm doing, because I want to make sure we impress the dentist here. And that's what you can see us doing, is just finalizing this crown, going around the outside and making sure everything's nice and smooth. This is one of those cases when I worked with the large group practice, I actually knew preferences of, this dentist wanted this margin and this wanted this one. So I would sometimes put in different margins for the dentist. But because this general dentist and I, we have been working for a long time, he's super talented. I love working with him. But I haven't done anything like this for him. On that same note, this is another thing to make sure you do, is pick up the phone and call the dentist. Don't rely on them to read the report. This is not something that everyone may have been exposed to. This dentist and I have worked together, like I said, for a long time. He's in my study club, great guy, extremely talented, and it's important that you communicate with them. So once I was done with this, picked up the phone, gave him a call, let him know what was going on, and he's totally on board. The other thing to consider is you want to make sure you do this with dentists who understand what's going on. And there you can see the final crown preparation looking nice and clean there. Nice raised margin, looking good as far as that. Now, this is what you can see from the dentist saying, nice job on the crown prep for them, barely adjusted it. And there's the proof. The tissue is looking good on the distal, seemed to be healing the same. So I will make sure I post the crown. I'm going to hopefully get the bite wing from him once he gets that in there. But as always, thank you so much for watching. And wait a second, you didn't think I was going to let this one go, did you? Bro, canal is overfilled. No obturation material should be out of the apex into the periapical region. So let's look at the tooth. You can see what it looks like beforehand. Pretty straightforward. Here's what it is after. Small little sealer puff here. Now there is this thought process, and there's a lot of things I have to say about this, but let's quick go to the literature. If we look at sealer puffs, there is no difference in treatment outcome. Sealers used to be cytotoxic in the past, but the new stuff that we use, such as AH+, isn't, and they exhibit significantly less cytotoxicity once they set. Overfillings are not associated with a poor outcome in teeth without apical periodontitis. This tooth did not have anything on there. You can see that it's caused by the infection, not overfillings inside there. Also, it's going to be from instrumentation. No one here, I often get accused of not removing enough tooth structure, not over-instrumenting. So that's wrong. And let's just keep going. You see that there's a 100% success rate for overfillings in teeth without apical periodontitis. So if you want to call the sealer puff that I have an overfilling, go ahead. I don't care, bro. The thing that bothers me about this, and if you haven't watched my video on prognosis, I'll link it below. People are so sure of themselves that a technical component is 100% necessary and sufficient for success. I can show you plenty of cases where patency wasn't achieved and a case is successful, and I can show you plenty of cases where a tooth had patency or was overfilled and successful. The overconfidence of some endodontists thinking that they know exactly what is necessary for success drives me absolutely bonkers. I'm from the internet. I know not to feed the trolls, but I don't care. I am out here taking the slings so that we can progress as a specialty. And people coming in and saying things with such confidence, such absolutism is unacceptable. Go ahead and keep leaving comments. It's totally fine. But be curious. Don't be judgmental and don't think that you know all the answers. If you haven't watched my video on keys to a good life and success, if you think you know exactly how to do a root canal, it's time to quit. Because we work in science. We work in an ever-changing field. So don't come to me and say that you know exactly what is necessary, because none of us do. And the reason I can prove that to you is I can show you plenty of cases that do not look like they would pass on the boards and have. Okay. With that being said, let's have a gentle reminder here that we work on people. We don't work on teeth. As quoted by the fantastic Panky, I've never seen a tooth walk into my door. So what I'd advise you, stop focusing on a recipe that you need to do this, or don't, if you do this, you'll have success. That's not how we work. That is how a technician works. That's not how a doctor works. A doctor looks at the patient and creates a unique plan based on the patient, not the tooth, not what they learned in residency. They base it on the patient. Start focusing on your patient. Okay, so let's quick go for the conclusions. Number one, make sure the patient is on board. Set yourself up for success. Make it so that you have a small, little, easy hoop to jump over. Number two, make sure you call the dentist. Tell them what's going on. In this case, it was easier because I've known this dentist for a long time. He's fantastic, and he's worked with me in the study club, so he's seen this concept before. But if you haven't had that interaction with the dentist before, it's really good to make sure you get ahead and communicate. Number three, make sure you use an opaque material. It's much easier for them to see the transition from the tooth structure to the composite if it's bright white than if it's like a tooth-colored material. Make your general dentist's life easy. That is the number one piece of advice I can give you. This dentist is not only extremely talented, he was very appreciative that it was a much easier crown preparation. And don't feed the trolls. I should know this, but here we are. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I apologize for the rant. Please comment belowhand. I promise I won't make fun of you unless you're an asshole. I'll talk to you all next time. Oh my god.